Chapter 3 Faceless Fiends. Alfred limped down the corridor, steadying himself on the sideboard to catch his breath. Quite a few paces ahead, the Royal Guard's cloaks fluttered as they bustled the boy's mother along. Alfred tried to speed up, but in doing so he stumbled over a rug. Thud! Twisting his ankle. Ouch! With no chance of catching up with him, he thought of Richard the Lionheart and called out, I command you to stop! Not only was Alfred out of breath, but he was not used to giving orders. As a result, the words came out wonky. Despite Alfred being royal, and these being the Royal Guards, the pair of faceless fiends ignored him. The Queen turned her head and shouted back to her son, Please, Alfred, I don't want you to see this! There was a look of terror in her eyes, a look the boy had never seen before. His mother had always been a wonder at pretending everything was tickety-boo when it clearly wasn't. She would always make up stories to cover what was really going on. The sound of an explosion in the middle of the night was nothing more than a thunderstorm. She would then stroke Alfred's head until he drifted off back to sleep. After his mother had mysteriously gone missing one night from the palace, Mother would make believe that Grammy had written postcards to him. She was the old queen, his father's widowed mother, and much loved by the boy. Alfred always called her Grammy because when he was little he couldn't say Granny. His mother would read these postcards aloud to him as she put him to bed at night. Dearest darling grandson, I am writing to you from the deck of a splendid old cruise ship. I am sailing round and around the world. Please don't worry about me. I will see you again one day, I promise. I miss you and I love you. Slobbery kisses, Grammy. My darling grandson Alfred, just a little postcard to tell you all is well. Would you believe I am all the way up Mount Everest? It was quite a hike, but I can see for miles and miles and miles. It is wondrous. I want you to know that even though I am far from you, you are always in my heart. I miss you more than ever. Kisses and cuddles, Grammy. It was only when Alfred grew older that he suspected his mother had written all the postcards herself. When he asked whether they would ever set foot outside Buckingham Palace, the Queen would take her son on an imaginary flight around the world. Hold my hand and together let's fly up into the air, across London, across the sea, over the pyramids of London, down the Grand Canyon of America, along the Great Wall of China, and back to dear old Blighty in time for tea. In his mind's eye, the boy would see everything his mother described. The adventures gave him hope that one day he would be able to leave the palace. Just then, Alfred felt something or someone slam down on his shoulders. Doof! He took a sharp intake of breath, but he was so shocked that no sound came out of his mouth. Two large gloved hands were holding on to him. Alfred turned round. It was another royal guard who had somehow crept up on the boy after he'd stumbled on the rug. Silent, just like the others, he picked the prince up with ease and dragged him back to his bedroom. Let me go, I said. Let me go. Alfred was powerless to resist. In moments he was deposited back in his bedroom and the door shut behind him. Shh! He lingered behind the door and listened. Outside, the guard waited for a while before the sound of footsteps betrayed his movements. In his head, Alfred counted to 100. As much as he wanted to race through the numbers, he knew that was a foolish idea. He needed to count until he thought the coast would be clear. 97, 98, 99, 100. On 100, he opened his bedroom door slowly and silently. Then he peeped out and checked that no one was around. The corridor was clear, so he tiptoed down it before hurrying down the long sweeping staircase and across the grand ballroom. This room once played host to the world's most extravagant parties. Now it was a ghost of a room. The chandelier was hanging by a thread. The silk curtains drooped on the floor and damp had blotted the walls with ugly, dark patches. Desperately out of breath, the sickly boy stumbled again. This time he fell flat on his face. Bang! Off! Alfred noticed there was some kind of powder on his hands and face. At first he thought it was dust. The place was encrusted with the stuff. but it wasn't dust. This had a smell to it that was different. Chalk! Scrambling to his feet, he noticed that there were faint chalk markings all across the vast floor. It was as if the boy were standing at the centre of a life-size chessboard. Someone had tried to rub the lines and markings off, but traces were left behind. Alfred bent down. There were words and symbols, but despite his love of books, he couldn't recognise any of them. What's more, there were burn marks in the wood and a large discoloured area where something heavy had been moved. Alfred shivered as he realised something. There were strange going-ons in this palace. The boy stood up and walked slap-bang into someone. Doof! Or rather, not someone, but something. The Octobot. A robot programmed to do all a butler's duties. It was meant to make life easier, but actually it made it harder. Much harder. It looked not unlike an octopus, if an octopus were made of metal and trundled across the ground. Crucially though, it did have 8 arms, each one with a special attachment for performing different tasks. Hence the name Octo for octopus and Butt for butler, although its name made it sound more like it was an octopus's bottom. The Octobot had the following arm attachments: a spray for spraying nice smells wherever nasty smells are, a fly swatter for swatting flies, a spoon for stirring a cup of tea, a hand for stroking a corgi, a hoover hoovering up crumbs, a croquet mallet for playing croquet, a duster for dusting a shelf, an iron for pressing a shirt. Good morning, Mr. President, jabbered the Octobot. It was always getting things wrong. Oh, hello, Octobot, whispered Alfred. I wasn't expecting to bump into you. Please, can you keep your voice down? Roast chicken, replied the robot before announcing. You will be pleased to know I have boil-washed your underpants. With that, the Octobot flung a gigantic pair of unwashed men's pants at the prince. They must have belonged to some humongous old man. Whoosh! They landed slap-bang in the boy's face. Thank you, Octobot, whispered Alfred as he removed the still stinky underpants from his nose. Now, are you ready for your game of croquet? No, hissed the boy. The robot swung its croquet mallet arm so hard it bashed the wall. Bang! So hard that the arm itself came loose. Twunk! It fell to the floor with a crash. With 7 arms rather than 8, it was now not so much an Octobot as a Septembabot. Septem is the Latin word for 7. Outside the ballroom, Alfred could hear the footsteps of royal guards growing nearer. Stomp! 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 The soldiers were just outside the wall, the tall wooden double doors that led into the ballroom. You go that way, urged the boy, spinning the Octobot round to face in their direction. The Pope needs his toenails clipping. Very good, princess, came the reply. With all his might, Alfred pushed the Octobot, so it trundled off in the direction of the doors. As the boy tiptoed out of the ballroom, he looked back to see the Octobot crash straight into the guards, knocking them to the floor and accidentally slapping one in the face with its corgi-stroking hand. Slap, slap, slap. The guard grabbed the arm to make the robot stop, and it came off in his hands. Oh, no, exclaimed the robot. I will never stroke a corgi again. The poor Octobot was now down to 6 arms. It really should be named the Sexabot, but that sounds far too rude. Ahead of Alfred was the entrance to the throne room. This was a fortress within the fortress of Buckingham Palace. In a way, it was a panic room, like a giant safe. It had been installed in a case of an attack, or horror upon horror, in case the revolutionaries ever managed to break into the palace itself. The walls of the throne room had been made of metre-thick steel. The only way in or out was through a huge metal door, which opened only with fingerprint recognition. Just 2 people had access to that room. The first was the boy's father, the king. The second was the king's chief advisor, the Lord Protector. The Lord Protector was an elegant figure in his 60s. He was well-spoken and refined, with impeccable manners. A learned man, he spoke with great authority on any subject you might care to mention. Art, literature, philosophy. He wore a black shirt buttoned up to the top without a tie and a smart grey suit. On his lapel, he sported a gold pin badge which, like the flag and the armbands the Royal Guards wore, depicted a griffin. The Lord Protector had worked at Buckingham Palace for as long as anyone could remember. He started off in the palace library, tending to the thousands of ancient books collected there. Saints Through the Ages, The King's Beasts, History of the Supernatural. Most of the books were displayed on shelves, but there was a handful kept under lock and key in a cabinet. Only the Lord Protector had the key. Like museum pieces, Alfred was not allowed to take these books up to his room. However, he could look at their covers. One intrigued him the most. It was an ancient red leather-bound book with gold lettering on the front. The boy knew very little Latin, but he knew enough to translate that libro was a word you often found in library books. It meant book. So this was the Book of Albion. Once when he'd slipped into the library unnoticed, Alfred had seen the Lord Protector studying it. Glancing over the man's shoulder, he saw that there were ornate hand-painted pictures inside. But before he could make out what they were, the Lord Protector had slammed the book shut and locked it back in the case. Of course, this only intrigued the boy more. Over the years, the Lord Protector had gained the trust of the king to the extent that he had become his closest adviser. As the country slid into ruin with crops failing and no clean water to drink, the Lord Protector introduced extreme measures in the king's name. Food and water were rationed. There were curfews at night, so people couldn't go outside. Punishments were severe, including execution. The government was outlawed. The army and the police force were disbanded and replaced by the Royal Guard. The Union Jack was replaced by the flag of the Griffin. Since the catastrophic events that had plunged the kingdom into darkness, the king had relied heavily on the Lord Protector to guide him through this terrifying new world. Over the years, the king had become more and more withdrawn, as if he had disappeared into the back of his mind. No one knew why exactly, but the king, who had once been so full of life, seemed as if he were one of the walking dead. Soon, he was ruler only in name. The country was controlled by the Lord Protector. When Alfred spied his mother being held by the royal guards outside the huge metal door to the throne room, he seized his chance. The lady was making a lot of noise and struggling to get away, which distracted the two soldiers. "This is no way to treat your queen! Unhand me! Do you hear? Unhand me at once!" The boy tiptoed behind them, and when the metal door slid open, whoosh, he took a deep breath and sneaked in.